Okay, so as I have here, at least designated as part of the sponsor panel is Michael Wilpers, Kristen Zimmer, and Justin Berry, so it should have enough seats up for we have some other witnesses signed up, and Sarah Augustine, if you want to bring anybody else up, that's fine. But, okay, so we're on Senate Bill 62, and we're going to start with you, Senator Augustine.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. Senator Malcolm Augustine here, asking for a favorable report on Senate Bill 62, Land Use Public Service Companies Pollinator-Friendly Vegetation Management. Colleagues, the bill is a pretty simple bill. Really, at the end of the day, what I want you to understand is what this bill does is it provides flexibility to to utilities in a very narrow exemption from local ordinance that have to do with things like weed control. So it's like, you've got a local ordinance that says that you've got to cut your weeds after they reach a certain height. And basically what all this piece of legislation is doing is just saying that under very narrow circumstances, and you do very specific things, that the utilities wouldn't be subject to that ordinance. This very narrow set of circumstances that we want to encourage these corridors that are pollinator friendly, and so that we're having these pollinator friendly management. And you'll hear from the folks on the panel about instances where that has not occurred, including in, as I mentioned, in one of the neighborhoods that I represent, where we've had this pollinator-friendly meadow that the utility wanted to support, but then ended up getting cut, and you'll hear a little bit about that and how we want to try to support that. We want to make sure that we are supportive of being able to maintain that. Now, what I will say is that while that is a narrow circumstance, I often talk about in this area, the community where we have this area that it makes sense to have a meadow. Very close to that, there is another section of the utility right-of-way that has had issues with folks who are with encampments, and where there has been damage done to certain things like cell towers and stuff like that, where it's not appropriate for, that area actually needs to be cut. And there is in this bill that says that if those requirements are needed, that the utility would be able to do that. So it's not all this is really trying to do is provide flexibility to encourage these pollinator-friendly environments. Last thing that I'll say, and I'll turn it over to my panel, is that a lot of folks have these very vivid sort of memories of their childhood and stuff like that. I don't. Mine are very few and far between. It just is what it is, right? But one of them I do have is when I was 5.5 years old, when my brother was born. I remember being sent over to a friend's house and just being scared. You know what I mean? I was scared. I could still see the closet and the darkness, and you're scared of it. So that's a memory that I have of my childhood. But another memory that was not a very positive memory, right? I'm still holding on to it. Another memory that I do have though as a kid is that the area where I grew up, there was not too far from the back of where I live were power lines. There were power lines, and it wasn't necessarily a meadow, but there was a wooded area between the power lines and sort of the edge where the power lines were. And I vividly remember one day growing up, because you're a kid, you're out there, you're messing around, you're playing whatever, looking up and seeing this huge mass of monarch butterflies. And I've never forgotten that. I could still see those butterflies. It was just amazing, right? To see all these beautiful butterflies. And that's a positive experience that I had. And it's one that, still stays with me today. And I'm hopeful that we can have that for some other kids, because this is something that's important. It's important in the neighborhoods that we represent. It's the reason why I want to try to work through. There's some issues with the definitions in here. You'll hear, or you can look in the testimony where the utilities have some issues with the definitions. We're going to work through that. That's my intent. We're going to work through the definitions to get back to the simple part of what this bill is trying to do, which is to allow for us to have these pollinator-friendly areas for a variety of reasons. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'd like to turn it over to my panel.
Okay, any questions for Senator Augustine before we go to the sponsor panel? Okay, seeing none, Senator Augustine, do you have any sequence you want to?
Mr. Wilpers is going to go first.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. Mr. Wilper? All the witnesses each have 2.5 minutes, just a reminder.
Good afternoon, Chairman Feldman and committee members. My name is Michael Wilpers, and I'm testifying on behalf of over 70,000 members and supporters of the Maryland Sierra Club. The Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club strongly supports SB 62 because of its primary purpose, to greatly increase pollinator habitat in the state by reducing the amount of mowing along electric transmission lines. In doing so, SB 62 would also reduce the burning of fossil fuels from mowing, as well as the costs for vegetation management overall, both of which will produce savings that the utilities can pass on to consumers. At the same time, as the Senator mentioned, the bill preserves the authority of utilities to mow whenever needed to ensure the safe and reliable delivery of electricity, and the authority of the counties to require mowing whenever needed to protect human health and safety. In North America, nearly a third of all bumblebee species are threatened with extinction, as are 20% of our butterflies. In Ohio, where detailed studies have been done, the number of butterflies appearing in any one year has dropped 33%. In California, the monarch butterfly population dropped by a staggering 99% over the last 40 years. A primary cause of these declines is the loss of meadow and grassland habitats on which these pollinators depend. The good news is that in Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County, PEPCO and BG&E have already worked for more than 30 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage power lines on federal land as habitat to support wildlife, including pollinators. Research at these locations shows that they support nearly 150 species of native bees. That's nearly a third of all the bees in Maryland, and 40 species of butterflies. Currently, our utilities cannot expand on these successes outside of these federal and state properties because most of our counties have in place weed ordinances originally intended for homeowners that require wildflowers and grasses to be kept at no more than 12 inches in height. As you know, most wild grasses and wildflowers go to well over 12 inches in height. This bill fixes the problem by exempting utilities from these ordinances for their power lines, except as mentioned, to ensure the safe and reliable delivery of electricity and to protect human health and safety. We believe this bill has outstanding potential for being a true win-win for our state. As you'll hear now from our other panelists, what's good for pollinators and the power companies is also good for plants, birds, and people. We urge the committee to support this bill and recommend its passage by the General Assembly.
Okay, thank you. Who's up, Senator Augustine? You're the designator here.
Okay, well, go ahead, please.
And tell us your name.
Good afternoon, Chairman Feldman and other committee members. Judy Fulton on behalf of the Maryland Native Plant Society. We support Senate Bill 62 with the wording changes that Senator Augustine referred to because of its importance to native plants. We are a nonprofit with over 2,000 very active members, making a difference in Maryland for 30 years. Frequent mowing creates spaces hostile to native plants. Instead, non-native invasive plant populations can increase until they take over under power lines, creating an environment that looks green but is actually a biological desert for native pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. Not only do the invasive plants damage the environment, but they have been shown to harm human health, and they cost over $34 billion annually in the U.S. Frequent mowing destroys native flowers before they mature enough to produce fruits and seeds. How can native plant species survive if there are no seeds? How can they create genetically diverse plant populations that can deal with diseases and the hardships of climate change if new plants can't grow? Healthy habitats require a lot of diversity to sustain themselves. And just a quarter of a mile under a rarely mown portion of the power line through the Sligo Creek area, botanists have counted more than 125 native plant species. 2 out of 5 of the world's plant species are at risk of extinction. By creating power line corridors for native plants, we can make progress with preserving unique ecosystems that support our planet's biodiversity and also help Maryland's most endangered plants. Our blue sundial lupines are at high risk for extinction, along with the globally rare frosted elfin butterfly, whose young can only survive on lupines. But I've seen these beautiful lupines blooming where BGE and Pepco agreed to stop mowing. Serpentine barrens are globally rare ecosystems. Because Pepco has agreed to careful vegetation management in Montgomery County's Travelodge serpentine, there's some hope for other plants critically endangered in Maryland, including striped gentian and featherbells, which are found in 5 or fewer locations in the state. Shouldn't we do our part here in Maryland, helping to preserve our natural heritage and creating a better future for all of us? The Maryland Native Plant Society urges a favorable report on SB 62. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who's going to go next? Mr. Barrett? No?
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you, senators. My name is Jim Brown. I am the policy director for Audubon Mid-Atlantic here in Maryland. Audubon Mid-Atlantic is the regional office of the National Audubon Society, representing over 35,000 Marylanders who advocate for the protection of birds, bird habitat, and policies aiming to protect both birds and human communities in the face of increasing environmental challenges, habitat loss, pollution, and climate change. Audubon Mid-Atlantic supports SB 62 because it provides for the dual location of utility corridors with important ecosystem enhancements. Specifically, this bill protects birds. What is good for pollinators is good for birds, and what is good for birds is good for all of us. The avian science tells us birds are in decline due to habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. 1/3 of eastern forest bird species experience significant population declines in the last 50 years. Grassland and shrubland birds, such as the eastern towhee and brown thrasher, are disappearing even faster. These species require meadow and shrub conditions that SB 62 will allow in what is currently fragmented habitat. Enabling these edge meadows provides critical landscape diversity for birds to nest, rest, breed, and feed. Iconic birds such as the wood thrush, American kestrel, brown thrasher, prairie warbler, eastern meadowlark, and blue grosbeak, which are in decline across Maryland, will benefit from this bill, as will the people that get to see them. As Michael mentioned, this is proven to be true here in Anne Arundel County on a power line managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as managed habitat. Over 120 species of birds use a BGE power line crossing the South River Greenway, including the declining field sparrow, prairie warbler, and yellow-breasted chat. The science tells us eastern habitat is becoming increasingly fragmented. Fragmentation leads to lower productivity in bird populations. Restoring these right-of-ways to a more natural state will increase bird habitat. SB 62 allows jurisdictions to address ecological challenges by preserving our utility grid while integrating beneficial uses to make Maryland a leader in habitat conservation, ecosystem preservation, and the protection of birds now into the future. Audubon, Maryland respectfully urges a favorable review of this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got one last witness on the panel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Zimmer. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I've lived in Carroll Highlands for the last 29 years. I'm here to describe for you why we need SB 62. Carroll Highlands is an unincorporated community in Prince George's County's District 47. Like most communities close to the city, we are diverse ethnically, racially, and economically. As such, it is sometimes a challenge to find common ground. I stumbled upon common ground a couple of years ago while walking in the Power Line Corridor meadow adjacent to the neighborhood. It's always been a great place to walk, and it was especially so during the pandemic. Meeting neighbors on the trail led to conversations and discoveries about what was growing there and why. Why did a pair of American kestrels return each year to mate? Why did the field sparrows hang out in the blackberry bushes? Why were there so many butterflies and grasshoppers in the warm months? And what is an eastern-tailed blue? We began to appreciate the meadow as community green space. But first we had to deal with trash, a lot of it. So the first meadow cleanup was organized. I have never seen so many of my neighbors together in one place, having fun. Realizing that environmental stewardship was important to so many of us, we began to look for other green projects. We joined the county's Growing Green with Pride each spring and fall, conducting more cleanups and mulching trees. We built nesting boxes for American kestrels and northern flickers, and PG Parks installed them at the edge of the meadow in cooperation with Pepco. We created the Ivy Brigade to help neighbors remove the English ivy that was killing our community's trees. We began leading monthly meadow outings to identify birds and plants. Using iNaturalist to document the findings, observers have identified 716 species of plants and animals in the meadow in the last couple of years. We also installed 3 pollinator gardens at the main intersection of the neighborhood this fall, our most ambitious green project. The meadow would not have been the inspiration for all this if a small part of it, the part closest to the creek, were not, in fact, a meadow. Pepco stopped mowing this section years ago by informal agreement with Friends of Sligo Creek. SB 62 would remove a pivotal barrier to allow Powerline corridor lawns to turn into Powerline meadows. Please choose this to help this bill help more communities discover natural beauty and to protect Carroll Highlands Meadow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zimmer. Any questions for any of the panelists, as well as Senator Augustine? We've got Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for working with different stakeholders here to try to narrow and make this workable. Just one question, though, for some of these, where these lines are located that are near agricultural fields, there's a concern. I actually serve on my county's Noxious Weed Committee. There's a concern if a kind of out-of-control weeds, that weed seed will blow onto active crop ground and cause an issue there. I didn't know if you were able to work through any of those potential issues yet with those stakeholders.
No, but I do appreciate that, Senator. I definitely will take that into consideration, work on that as a part of it, as we bring together all the stakeholders to get the definitions right.
Could I add a point, Senator?
Yeah, go on.
The bill in its first incarnation last summer was sent to the Maryland Association of Counties, and they signed off on it with the exceptions that are reflected in the original version of the bill, which you have, which is it exempts farmland, and it exempts state parks, county parks, where for trail maintenance, where they cut through those parks. So the Maryland Association of Counties is happy with the new language, which is reflected in the version of the bill you have before you. And as Senator Augustine mentioned, we have a number of other changes we've worked out with the utilities in terms of the mowing window, which is we're proposing be more than doubled, and other things that they have asked for. So I think the farmland issue has been addressed.
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We've got just one other signed witness, favorable with amendments, Drew Schmidt-Perkins. So if she comes up, you all are free to take a seat, and we're going to, Ms. Schmidt-Perkins will, who is again signed up favorable with an amendment or amendments, you will get 2.5 minutes, and that will, so the only witnesses signed up on the bill, Senate Bill 62. Okay.
Thank you very
Clock's on.
Thank you very much. Take this off. I'm Drew Schmidt-Perkins, representing SMART on Pesticides and Maryland Pesticide Education Network. We're very strongly in favor of this bill, creating more pollinator habitat, places for birds, plants, critically important. But we have one amendment that we've been working with the proponents and the sponsor on, And when we create these meadows, we want to make sure that we do not inadvertently kill off or harm all the pollinators, bees and birds, by inadvertent spraying of pesticides and herbicides. And so we have language that says that these things should be used only at the last resort and always the least toxic option, so that these meadows continue to thrive as this bill intends. And as I said, we've been working with people on these. We believe we have agreement on them. We'll continue to work with the sponsor to make sure we bring that language forward.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, and that concludes the bill hearing on
Thank you.
Senate Bill 62, which brings us to our next bill hearing, which Augustine's going to preside, and I'm going to Okay, members of the committee, some of you may have happened to read Maryland Matters this morning. There was actually a rather long article about this very issue and this very bill, so you may want to take a look at that. But just for a little background, this bill, a virtually identical version of this bill, did pass both the House and the Senate last session. In fact, out of the state Senate, it passed unanimously out of the Finance Committee, unanimously out of the full Senate. So every member of this committee actually has voted for this bill in the 2022 session. Governor Hogan did veto the bill. Quite frankly, it was surprising. There was no testimony last session in opposition to the bill. But since only Senator Augustine and Brooks would have heard this bill, also in economic matters, give me a little time, indulge me a little bit just to kind of walk through what this bill does. So we heard a little bit about the Empower Act earlier during the briefing. And so a little history here is important. Back in 2008, the General Assembly passed the Empower Act, which at that time was focused on target reductions of 15% in terms of electricity consumption by 2015. This was a 2008 bill. The program turned out to be so successful that in 2017, the legislature extended the program and established a new annual energy savings of 2% per year that the Maryland utilities were required to meet. This committee last year in the Climate Solutions Act actually increased that goal to 2.25% for 2025 and eventually 2.5% for 2026. So this Empower program has been a bit of a model for the nation. I honestly do say that Maryland has led the nation with this target that we set up in 2017. It's going to go up over the next few years. We are going to have some legislation this session, Empower reform legislation that the Public Service Commission is bringing. I think Senator Lewis Young has a bill in the same space, so that keep an eye out for that. But here's sort of to get to the issue that has arisen over the years and came to sort of, I think, a head last session. So the annual savings goals that I referenced, this 2% target, that applies to all homes for Maryland. So every Marylander on their electric bill pays an Empower surcharge. And in fact, you heard Commissioner Litton talk about, on average, and we've had this in place since 2008, and then even in 2017 we changed the law a little bit, somewhere between $6 and $8 goes towards this Empower program. And the utilities pay a role, but every resident in Maryland pays into the Empower program for energy efficiency and the like. And the utilities play a role. They come up with a plan to get to that 2% target. They go to the PSC with the plan, and they have to get approval for the plan. And they then get money out of Empower to get to that 2% target. Here's where the problem has arisen and has emerged. It has to do with the fact that lower income folks, Marylanders, pay a much, much higher portion of their income in energy bills, including the Empower surcharge, out of their income. and yet they have a very, very low participation rate. They get very little out of this same program. So here are some statistics. So in Maryland, lower income residents pay on average 550% more as a portion of their income on their energy bills than the average non-low income person. Put another way, most of our non-low income folks in Maryland pay about 2% of their wages on energy. But in Maryland, our lower income folks are paying 12 or 13% of their wages towards energy costs. And so that has a whole ripple effect. Energy insecurity for families who have to choose between energy costs, other necessities. All kinds of studies have found that using energy more efficiently, energy efficiency is one of the fastest, most effective ways to reduce utility costs, helping lower income households spend less of their money on energy and overcoming this energy insecurity issue. There's some racial justice issues because a large majority of the residents that have to deal with these issues tend to be African American, Hispanic, so there's that component. But it's a vicious cycle. The same folks that aren't getting much, that are paying a high proportion towards energy costs and not getting much back out of Empower tend to live in older stock homes, deteriorated energy infrastructure, poor insulation already, other health and safety problems that they have to deal with before weatherization and those kinds of upgrades are considered a priority. Forced to deal with broken HVAC systems, drafty windows, unreliable electric systems, et cetera, and so it's a bit of a vicious cycle. Now here's some more statistics to kind of drill even a little deeper into this, this issue. Between 2013 and 2020, Empower only served 6% of eligible low-income participants. 2021 to 2023 Empower Circle, there was $48.7 million contributed into Empower Maryland through those surcharges I was referencing, but only $28 million went out to low-income folks. So they're putting in $48 million, only getting $28 million to help with these older stock homes. And right now in Maryland, while we have a 2% target for everything, we have no goals whatsoever or no agencies accountable for ensuring maximum energy efficiency in these lower income homes. We have nothing. Many states have targets specific to low income folks. We have nothing in Maryland, which is why we had the bill last year, which passed unanimously. So in a nutshell, the problem is Marylanders with the highest energy burden in the state have the lowest participation in the Empower programs, get the least benefit from these customer-funded energy efficiency programs, and there's no Maryland mechanism in place to deal with that. In fact, the Public Service Commission itself stated in one of its recent orders, improving the energy efficiency of low-income households is a critical focus for Maryland, but the numbers of the past 5 years are abysmal. Nothing's happened. We have, again, no energy efficiency goals or targets for low-income houses like many other states do. So we have to deal with this issue. I think it's an important issue. So what does Senate Bill 144 do to address this problem? So it establishes a very specific energy consumption savings target for low-income households in Maryland, like other states, to basically be achieved through the low-income portion of Empower Maryland, which is administered by our Department of Housing and Community Development. So the targets are as follows. We've got to achieve an annual incremental gross energy savings of at least 0.5% starting in 2024, compared to using 2016 as a benchmark. So 0.53 savings by 2024, 0.72% for 2025, ratcheting up to 1% in 2026. These are very, very modest, first time creating benchmark goals and accountability. And so here's kind of, I think, some other statistics. So under the bill, the Department of Health and Department of Housing and Community Development is going to create very specific plan. It's all in the bill. You can see it that details the program, the costs associated, where the funding's going to come from, all the steps are going to be taken. They're going to have to provide updates to the General Assembly, to the governor, et cetera, to get to these targets that I just identified. and here's actually back to the Empower program, the utilities have actually gone in and requested a certain amount of money each and every year to get to that 2% target. But in 2021, they actually got there spending $25 million less than they even asked for. And actually, even in 2019, they asked for 131, they got 110 million, and they still got to the 2% target goal. So there's money in the Empower program that can be redistributed more equitably. We're not talking about growing the pie or raising surcharges. We're talking about the existing pot. But on top of that, we have money from the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure programs that have passed out of Capitol Hill. And so I think the best guess that we think most likely there's probably about $100 million available in some of the federal programs, and I think Ruth Ann Norton can talk a little bit more about that. I have some of the statistics here about those dollars. So, for example, in the infrastructure bill, which passed in November 2021, there's about $136 million coming to Maryland over the next 10 years for rebate programs prioritizing low-income homes for efficiency and electrification upgrades. There's more money in the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, Empower has monies that, again, it can be more equitably distributed, all to get to these target goals. So that's in a nutshell. I would also say by establishing these low-income savings targets, it has, I think, a multiple set of effects beyond just reducing energy bills for our lower-income folks. We had a briefing here about affordable housing at some point. So one of the other byproducts of all this is weather assistance, including the reduction or preservation of affordable housing stock. If you upgrade through weatherization, energy efficiency, these older stock homes, it's helpful to keep our affordable housing stock current. So there's all kinds of, I think, byproducts. So that's sort of in a nutshell. There's a couple of miscellaneous provisions I just want to throw in here, and then I'm going to address two final points that have been raised by the Public Service Commission, the Maryland Energy Administration, and our Department of Government Services about some of the language. I think these are all issues that can easily be resolved. The bill establishes a green and healthy task force that will help to analyze, advance the coordination of all our federal and state resources in the pursuit of delivering green, healthy housing and lowering energy bills for our lower income households. The task force will develop policy and statutory recommendations to eliminate barriers to low income households in that regard, so that we're creating this task force. Again, a very robust plan development and set of reporting requirements starting September 21st, 2023, to submit a plan to the Public Service Commission. These are going to be very detailed in collaboration with our utilities, the Department of Housing, Community Development. There was concern raised last year about if all this money goes for upgrades to the lower income households, will that result in landlords either evicting the tenants or charging higher rents, right? And so we have actually very specific language in here that says that the benefits will accrue primarily to low-income residents, and landlords cannot evict or raise prices to the benefits created specifically by those weatherization processes. So there is a sort of a protection in there. There are some labor standards. The only pushback, I wouldn't even call it pushback, but these were some commentary. I mentioned that the Empower Maryland program is going under some reform of sorts, and we're going to see some legislation in that regard. And it's a paradigm shift to moving away from electricity reduction, which has been the goal of Empower, these targets, to greenhouse gas reduction model, kind of a, I wouldn't say a paradigm shift in terms of terminology, but what the focus should be some of these programs. And so the Public Service Commission has suggested, even though I think we have some language in here that addresses that, we have language in here called, I think addresses this paradigm shift, but the Public Service Commission has come up with some amended proposed language to take that language that we have in the draft bill as introduced and kind of puts language in there that's more akin to where Empower program is moving under this reform package. I'll definitely work with the Public Service Commission on that. And actually, the Maryland Energy Administration made the same point, that we're going through this reform, and some of the terminology about electricity reduction, consumption is a little out of line with greenhouse gas reductions, which is more where the Empower program is going. I think that's easily resolved. And then finally, Department of General Services pointed out, because we do have language in here giving a preference to contractors that are minority-owned, women-owned, or veteran-owned when selecting businesses to help in the procurement process related to Empower. Now, this issue did not come up last year, but the Department of General Service had some concern about having this preference language in here. I did run that concern by our Attorney General's office yesterday, and I have, if anybody wants to see it, the Attorney General did come back and say that because we do not have, and we've had this with cannabis, and we've had this with gaming, because we don't have a disparity study to back up that language, that have preference language based on race or gender without a backup study of some sort, would make that particular provision of preferential treatment suspect constitutionally. So we have a couple options there. We can either remove that language or perhaps put in the bill asking for a disparity or something like that. But the language as is, according to the Attorney General, needs to be removed. But that was not raised last year, but it did come up, and I got an AG opinion. So colleagues, the ultimate goal here is to tap federal funds, redistribute Empower more equitably, and address this very pretty clear shortcoming in the Empower program. Marylanders with the highest energy burden in the state have the lowest participation in the Empower program and get the least benefit. And so how do we rectify it? So my hope is that, like last year when the bill passed unanimously out of our state Senate, we can do something like that with this bill, Senate Bill 144. Mr. Chair, with that, I'll take questions, but we do have a great panel of experts in this field, and I may have to defer to their expertise on some of any particular questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we can go directly to your panel in whatever order you see fit, and then we can have the questions after that.
I'll kick it off and move it down pretty quickly. And I have to commend Senator Feldman.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, could you just share with us your name?
Oh, yep, certainly. I'm Ruth Ann Norton. I'm the president and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. I also sit on the EPA's Children's Health Protection Advisory Council. I'm chair of the Maryland Lead Commission, and I'm currently the housing co-chair for Governor Westmore's Housing Policy Committee. And I will just say that I don't need to repeat the excellent testimony given by the senator, which I think was a thorough presentation of the bill. I will say that as we want to advance accessibility for funding that comes out of the Department of Housing and Community Development, one of the issues that we've identified in reviewing the department, this bill has been cited as a pathway to accessibility, to better spending, more effective government, more efficient way to do this work, but also just starkly closes a very clear equity gap for low-income families. There's no way to better say that, and this bill remedies that. The one thing I will add differently here is that one of the things that we're also doing is by investing energy efficiency and weatherization dollars and climate-related dollars in the lower-income households that are currently incrementalized and disinvested because of this gap. What we will also achieve is pretty significant health savings. And here's what the studies that we have done for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development show. We will reduce asthma-related and respiratory-related hospitalizations and emergency room visits by about 66%. We will reduce trip and fall hazards, and those mortality and morbidity data on older adults that come from extreme heat and extreme cold will be reversed by this work, saving us significantly on Medicaid and Medicare, but also allowing older adults to age in place with dignity and health. And we are creating a more coordinated system And studies that done on this kind of whole house coordinated approach show that we will save about 20 to 25% by looking holistically in these investments and driving that with energy efficiency. And we will close the gap on deferrals and declinations that hit low-income communities because we are moving in this direction. So I'm going to turn it over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Sorry, Justin.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join the panel. I'm Justin Berry. I work with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative as well. My role is a research and policy analyst for climate, energy, and equity. There's two main things I want to highlight, adding to the great testimony and detail already added. First, I wanted to highlight that in this bill, the charges for the savings, not just to come strictly from Empower, but for DHCD to really align the related programs that they operate, including Empower, which is a huge percentage of that, but also the programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program funded by DOE, and other related programs that are achieving efficiency in low-income homes. So taking this holistic approach is really going to allow us to make a difference and maximize the value of these funds that are coming through. With the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, it's clearly a huge federal priority, and we know it's a priority for the state of Maryland as well from recent bills passed and the priorities that have been articulated. So now is a great time to take advantage of those funds that are coming and serve the homes that are have the highest need. The second piece I wanted to talk about was the estimates for what it will cost to achieve these savings targets in the homes. In January 2021, a group, the Gable Associates, released a report looking at the savings targets that map to what is in this bill over a ramp-up period. So looking at the 3-year period that would be in line with the targets in this bill, what they estimate in first a conservative base case scenario, so taking the numbers from the most recent Empower cycle for the cost per kilowatt hour saved as it currently is, and assuming that would apply going forward, they estimate that the cost would be $83 million, $112 million, $156 million over those 3 different years. Now, they make the point that looking at programs across other states that operate similarly, in all of those cases, they achieve savings at a lower rate. That's because as the programs grow, they achieve economies of scale, increased efficiency from familiarity, can pull in different resources, and what they consider a probable case is that that will happen in Maryland as well. In that case, they're looking at $41 million, $56, and $78 million. As you heard Chair Feldman describe earlier, we're confident there's at least $100 million available, both through Empower as well as these federal funds and other funds in Maryland that are targeted at programs like this that we think should be easily applicable to this program. We expect that any increases in the Empower surcharges should be relatively small, and with the equity issues at stake, well worth the investment to make a difference in these homes.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. So I'm going to pull back the lens and talk about just that, equity.
Please tell us who you are.
Oh, right. I'm Darren Lovas, and I'm a senior policy advisor with the Natural Resources Defense Council and a proud resident of College Park, Maryland, and I'm glad to be here. So when the Empower program was enacted in 2008, at that time, a lot of people said it would be too costly and too feasible. But over the past 15 years, that's not been the case, and the program is really effective, and it's met its established goal every cycle. Unfortunately, while it's delivered diffuse energy efficiency benefits over the last 15 years, those benefits haven't been distributed equally. For example, while the rest of the Empower portfolio invested more than $2.4 billion in energy efficiency over the decade between 2012 and 2021, low-income homes received less than 9% of that total. And Cadmus Consulting found that in the current program cycle, 21 through 23, while low-income customers pay $146 million in surcharges, they'll get just $85 million in DHCD investments to improve their homes. And the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates found in every utility service area, low-income residential energy savings in the 2018 to 2020 program cycle were less than 2% of total portfolio savings, and that's lower in some utility service areas. So this is a huge design flaw because energy burdens are also unequally distributed. Experts estimate that to be affordable, household energy bills should consume no more than 6% of a household's income. But the average for low-income Marylanders is twice that, according to the latest market characterization study commissioned by OPC, and it's higher in some jurisdictions. So, as designed, Empower is regressive, and it's getting worse with every chapter you write. First, 15% by 2015, check. Then, accelerated savings to 2% per year, check. Now, with the Climate Solutions Now Act, we'll hit 2.5% per year. That's great, unless you're low income, falling further and further behind. The performance goals work. DHCD has no goal, though, driving its own energy efficiency services to those that need it most. Until now. Now you can fix it. A separate complementary performance goal for low-income programs is way overdue for this program, which is why NRDC respectfully asked the committee to favorably review S-144. So we really leave no one behind in Empower Maryland. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony from the panel and, of course, our chair and sponsor. Members of the committee, any questions for the chair and members of the panel? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next group of witnesses that will include Josh Tolkien, Emily Scarr, and Mary Olson. No, I'm sorry, not Mary Olson because she's virtual. Just Josh Tolkien and Emily Scarr to begin. Good to see you, Josh.
Good afternoon. My name is Josh Tolkien. I'm the director of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for hearing my testimony. The Sierra Club urges a favorable report for SB 144. I'm proud to say that I was an early advocate and lobbyist in support of the Empower Maryland legislation. I would echo the previous comments about the success of the program as well as the shortcomings of the program. I think that the changes outlined in this legislation are essential to ensure that Empower reaches its full potential. We are also very supportive of some of the broader changes that were alluded to. I believe that this legislation here is consistent and can be made consistent with the broader evolution of Empower into a climate reduction strategy, but making this equity improvement is an essential first step and should be taken as the legislation is introduced. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Josh. Anybody have any questions for Josh? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on then to Emily.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Emily Scarr. I'm the director of Maryland PIRG, the state-based, nonpartisan, small donor-funded public interest advocacy organization with grassroots members across the state. We want to thank you for those of you who voted for this last year and hope we can quickly send it to Governor Moore for his approval. I just wanted to highlight a few points from a forthcoming Maryland PIRG Foundation report on the Empower Maryland program, which I think put a finer point on some of the testimony you've already heard. So as Chair Feldman said, the Empower program has been tremendously successful and hit its 2% reduction in electricity savings yearly. But unfortunately, low-income Marylanders have been left out of some of those benefits. So according to the Public Service Commission, in 2021, for example, the limited income program achieved only 9% of its energy savings targets for limited income multifamily residences and only 70% of its goal for limited income single-family buildings. Part of the reason that to date, part of the reason for that is that Empower has allocated disproportionately few resources to limited income ratepayers. So while limited income homes represent at least 26.5% of Maryland households, only 17.5% of residential spending is allocated to them, meaning that low and moderate income ratepayers receive disproportionately few energy efficiency services. So our least resourced Marylanders are receiving too few benefits. And then finally, between the inception of Empower in 2021, the limited income program has served just under 50,000 households in the state, but our estimates suggest we have close to 600,000 limited households total. So at our current pace, if we do not speed up delivering these services to low-income Marylanders, it's going to take 130, 150 years for us to serve all limited income households. So the bill really addresses some of our top recommendations from our upcoming report on goal setting, planning, and reporting to ensure that the program is better operated and more successful. So we're happy to support this bill, and we recommend a favorable report. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any questions for Emily? Okay, thank you, Emily. Hearing none, we do have two virtual witnesses, and the first one will be Mary Olson as we get her up on here. Well, is she there? You want me to go to the other one? Oh, there she is. Okay, here we have Mary Olson, and you have 2.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mary Lee Olson, and I am an energy advocate with AARP. And AARP supports Senate Bill 144. We feel that the low income disparity between energy bills of what they pay as a percentage of their income is like drastically out of kilter. 13% of low-income households are paid in energy bills versus the national average of 8%. So we ask that, I think Senator Feldman gave an excellent detail of all the bill's details, and we support this and would ask a favorable vote in approving this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Lee Olson. Members of the committee, any questions for the witness? Okay, hearing none, we say thank you so very much for your testimony. We'll move on to the last witness on the last bill of the day, Zafar Shah. You have 2.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My video was disabled by somebody.
That's okay. You can still continue with your testimony.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
My apologies. Thank you, Chair Feldman, for sponsoring this bill, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee. My name is Zafar Shah, and on behalf of Maryland Legal Aid, we'd like to just provide Me Too support for this important bill. Maryland Legal Aid is the largest provider of civil legal services in the state. In 2021, we provided legal services to over 80,000 low-income Marylanders. Every one of the households we help falls into the category of either high or severe energy burden, whether they're in Garrett County, Baltimore City, or Somerset County, which has a 24% average energy burden for low-income renters. We've provided numbers and support in our written testimony, but I wanted to just say, as the Assistant Director for our Access to Counsel and Evictions program, that energy efficiency doesn't frequently enough come up as a poverty elimination or alleviation tool. It does not come up enough as an eviction prevention tool. But for our clients, particularly in my realm, which is in eviction prevention and housing cases, energy burdens are top of mind every day, and they contribute to housing injustice and housing instability. That's all I'm going to say. I appreciate the time, and we at Maryland Legal Aid urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Members of the committee, anyone have any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. That concludes the oral testimony associated with Senate Bill 144, and that is the end of the hearing. Thank you.